If you want to massively increase your success with agents like Cursor and Claude Code, this is the video for you. So vibe coding really caught on, allowing anyone to build an app without the need to write code. But anyone who has tried to build anything more than a demo app tends to run into errors and a mess of spaghetti code. So what if there was a better way than this? It's time to level up from vibe coder to pro developer. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use spec driven development, context engineering, and frameworks like the AGILE BMAD method to hugely increase your chances of success when building production level apps. Recently, we're hearing loads about the concept of context engineering and spec-driven development. Kiro was introduced last week from Amazon with a spec-driven development mode. Claude, Cursor, and Windsurf have introduced their own to-do list modes. And as far back as February, I introduced Agile spec-driven development via the 3 experts approach on my channel here, which you can see in this video, and I'll link it in the description down below. And I teach this technique in the Build with AI course and community, where you can join other builders building their first apps with AI without writing any code. Okay, enough talk. Let's get stuck into learning how to level up your skills from vibe to pro. So context engineering seems to be having its own hype cycle at the moment, but anyone who is a professional developer or product manager has been using these kind of techniques for years. So the idea is you don't jump blindly into a project and vibe code your way into oblivion. You start by having conversation with a product manager, AI agent, a UX designer, and a software architect. And from those conversations, you come up with a product requirements document, a UX design doc, and a software specification. And by reviewing these docs and feeding them then to your tool like Cursor or Claude Code, you have a much better chance of creating a better software project. So you can find the BMAD method at BMAD method on GitHub. If you're not familiar with Agile, it's a form of project management that allows you to work iteratively. So instead of doing a ton of planning up front in a waterfall style approach, you work in sprints, either a week or 2 weeks, develop a piece of software, release it, test it, and then that informs your next sprint. So the whole BMAD framework here is based on the Agile methodologies. And within that, then you have various different personas and stakeholders, an analyst, a product manager, an architect, a UX designer. These are all personas that would be part of the planning step. So it's broken down into 2 steps here. We have the planning step, which you normally do in Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT by pasting in these documents that I'm going to show you. So that's the planning stage at the start. And then you have the context engineered development. So in context engineering or spec-driven development fashion, you basically take all the docs that you had from the planning stage and you use a product owner or a Scrum Master agent to break those down into steps so the developer agent can begin to work on them. And typically that's broken down as stories or user stories. If you take a look at the user guide here, it kind of gives you a high level of the whole breakdown. So the first step here is the planning workflow, and it's suggested that you do this in a web UI like Gemini, ChatGPT, or Claude, instead of directly in your IDE like Cursor or Claude, purely because this is going to use a lot of tokens and you don't want to waste your context on a higher price tier. So maybe Gemini is a good selection here. So at gemini.google.com, I'm going to open a new gem here. So a gem is just like a project in Claude or a custom GPT in ChatGPT. So I'm calling this BMAD full stack team, and you can have this saved and use it again for other projects. In GitHub, go to the distribution folder here, then you're going to pick teams, and then we're going to pick this team full stack here, click on this one, and we're going to copy this whole file. Now this is a huge file, 10,000 lines here, but it's basically got the entire breakdown of how BMAD works. And this is the BMAD orchestrator we're going to be kicking off with. So I'm just going to download this file, and using the plus button here, I've added it into our knowledge for our gem. So I'm going to add this instruction in here, follow the web agent bundle instructions and assume the role of the BMAD orchestrator, do not break character. And we're going to save this. So once the gem is kicked off, I can just type in anything I want, like how do I get started, and hit return here. So we get this response back saying my primary purpose is to help you navigate the framework efficiently. And then we get these helpful commands here. Now this can be a little bit overwhelming or confusing when you start. The idea here is that there is a lot of different agents as part of the full stack team, and you might not necessarily know how you should get started. You can just ask the orchestrator here what's the best step forward, but I find this diagram here is really helpful to decide what you want to do yourself. So back in the BMAD method, go to BMAD core, then go to the user guide here. And so here we have a flowchart breakdown. So you can end up with many documents at the end of this flow, but the primary ones you want to end up with are the PRD and the architecture document. So as long as you know that's what the output of this is, there's multiple different ways to approach that. You can do lots of upfront analysis via brainstorming, market research, all of course using the web search abilities of Gemini or whatever model you're using. But essentially we need to kick off with some kind of a project brief. So I'm going to skip all this analysis here and go straight to interactive PRD creation. So we want to create a PRD or a product requirements document as our starting point. So this is very similar to the technique I've talked about before. So I'm going to say I'd like to work with the PM to create a PRD, or you could just type in star and the PM name to trigger that personality. So the product manager is telling me we really should start with a brief, so I'm going to follow his advice. So it says, no, I don't have a project brief. Let's create one first. So I'm just going to switch to 2 and then hit return. So here we're given a choice of interactive mode as we work with the business analyst Mary, or YOLO mode. I'm going to go with YOLO mode now just to get through this. So I'm giving it a quick product brief here. It's a project called Murmur, a note-taking app. We're going to build it on Next.js and Prisma. It's built for personal management, and it will have a sidebar and main area for notes. So that's just basically following the instructions here, and let's pass that in. So I've got a million ideas flying around in my head, building apps, testing agents, managing content, and keeping that chaos organized takes serious systems. So last week I talked about how I help manage that with Monday.com, and they've added some seriously cool AI features. And today I wanted to take a deeper dive on a use case that's been really helpful for me. I'll often brain dump a bunch of ideas into a task list like this and then kind of freeze on what to do next. Too many options, no clear starting point, classic analysis paralysis. But Monday.com has these things called AI blocks. So click this little button up here, discover AI, and then you can set up your own custom AI columns. So in this case, I've got all my tasks in here, and I've set up this AI column to give me the first steps required to get myself moving on any given task. So boom, within seconds, I've got a structured plan I can act on for each one of my tasks. And this is just one example. These AI blocks can do pretty much anything like write with AI, summarize, detect sentiment, translate. So if you're using Monday.com and haven't explored the AI features yet, you're sleeping on some serious leverage. My viewers can try Monday.com for free by hitting the link in the description. So our analyst creates a project brief, which is basically a starting point, executive summary, problem statement, lots of other useful headings here to kick the project off. So you want to review this and make sure you're happy before you proceed. Okay, so we've got our first document here. We want to save this. So let's just copy this all down so we have it. And we're going to create this as its own file. So you want to start saving these files. So now is a good time to open up your project in your IDE like Cursor, Windsurf, etc. So I'm just opening a blank new folder. So I've opened up Cursor with a new folder. It's blank, just called Murmur BMAD. And then I put this command in here, npx create next app latest dot, which means it'll create it in this directory, and we're just going to hit return. Now, the reason I'm just getting Next.js set up first in this folder is because Next.js doesn't allow you to install into a folder with files already in there. So if I start copying in the BMAD files, it's not going to work. So let's just get this step out of the way. I'm going to go with all the defaults here. If you're not familiar with Next.js, it's just a really good framework for creating both websites and web apps, and it's heavily supported. And it's one of those frameworks that AI seems to know very well because it's quite popular and it's been crawled a lot. Okay, so now that we've got that up and running, I can now create a folder called Docs. And then in that folder, I'm just going to save my project brief. I'm going to paste that in and just have that saved. You technically don't need to do this step, but it's just nice to have it as a reference. So I could use the command to switch characters here with the star agent and then PM, but I'm finding that if you just chat your way, it's a bit more intuitive. So I said, let's proceed to the PM step with our product brief to create the PRD. So again, it's a good idea just to reference the step that you're on here. We've got our product brief now, and we want to proceed to the PM step. So the PRD starts off with some functional requirements, non-functional requirements, some advanced options around reviewing the content that's in there. I'm just going to go with proceed for now. So I asked it to output the final PRD doc, and you can see a breakdown here. It's got our goals, our functional requirements, non-functional, and overall UX vision. We've got some stories broken down as well, story 1, 1.1, 1.2, and I downloaded that, saved it into Cursor, and then I've just uploaded again here as reference. Gemini has a large context window. It will probably remember this PRD as we go on to talk to the UX expert, but I'm not taking that for granted, and I'm just copying it back in here as context. Okay, so the next step I'm told to do is have a chat with the UX expert. So I'm engaging that with the star agent UX expert, and I'm going to say, take the PRD attached and create the UI UX spec. So we kick off a conversation with our fictional AI expert here, Sally, the UX expert, and we begin the generation of the UX and UI specification, target personas, usability goals, and many other headings. Some description for our wireframes and mockups, component libraries, branding and style guides with some potential color schemes, typography. This is really extensive. Animations, micro interactions. This is really well thought out and really full featured in terms of the full app setup. So again, the idea here is you review this thoroughly, make sure you're happy, make any changes that you want by having a further conversation with the agent, and then you can go and generate the final doc. So in this case, it's the front end spec MD. I'm going to save this into the docs folder as well. So back in Cursor, I've just gone and saved it here as the front end spec MD. It's giving me an option here to generate a UI generation spec that I can feed to the likes of Lovable or V0. We're going to skip that in this case and just go straight to the architect to come up with our final spec. So we start our conversation with Winston, the architect. So again, the generation of the document can be as involved or as hands-off as you like. So in this case, with the architecture doc, the agent is generating each section and then asking me for feedback to critique and refine. Or I can just decide to go and have it YOLO and finish off the entire document. But I encourage you really to do this properly in terms of understanding each section, stepping through it, and making sure that the right decisions are being made now that are going to save you a lot of time later on. Let's take a look at our full stack architecture document. So we have a high level architecture, we have platform information, the repository structure, some diagrams, architectural patterns. We're going with a serverless architecture with Next.js. Full breakdown here of TypeScript, Next, React, state management with Zustand. We're going to use PostgreSDB via Neon, Prisma ORM. And then of course, very important is our database schemas. So take a look at that and make sure that you're happy. Then we've got a unified project structure. And again, this is very important for helping your AI structure out the project. One of the biggest things I see where AI falls down in its code generation is missing this context and understanding where everything should go, the patterns that are really important for building a good application. So again, I'm just going to take that file and save it as architecture MD in my docs folder. And I think we're almost finished. So our final step then is to have a chat with our product owner, and they're going to run this master checklist to make sure that all the documents are aligned, that the right sections are in each one of the documents before we proceed into our development stage and our planning is complete. So let's have that chat with our PO. So I've uploaded all the docs again for reference, and then I'm just switching over to the product owner agent with star agent PO here. And then I've said I've attached all the docs for review and sign off. So I'm just going to kick this one off. So our PO here, our product owner, is saying, do we want to incrementally check each section or go with the YOLO mode to just get the final comprehensive report? So we're just going to go with YOLO for now. So the PO gives us our final pass on all the different sections. So we're good to go. So if it wasn't aligned, we'd basically go back and update our epics and stories and then update the PRD and run the checklist again until we were all happy and we were complete in terms of our documentation. So now our planning is complete. We're going to switch over to the IDE and start to shard our documents. So sharding is basically breaking them all down so they're much more usable in the context of our developer agent. So now that we have all our documentation in place in the docs folder, we want to be able to work with it via BMAD. So we're going to use this command here, npx BMAD method install. Now you're going to need Node in order to run this. Version, I think 20 or above should do fine. And so we get the BMAD method installer. So we want to enter the full path of your project directory. So this is what we have here. So I'm actually just going to copy the path here and we can paste it in. So sorry, I just clicked right there and then copy path, and then I can paste that in here. I'm going to select the BMAD Agile core system here. It's asking me, will the PRD product requirements document be sharded into multiple files? And I'm going to say yes. Will the architecture document be sharded? Yes. So we're going to pick our IDE, and you can pick more than one if you like. And what it's going to do is create a set of specific rules for your coding environment to work with the BMAD method. So we're just going to choose Cursor here and Claude Code. Now it's asking me here, do I want to include pre-built web bundles? So essentially that will be these initial files that we can use to have our chat with Gemini, just like we did there a second ago. So I'm just going to say yes for now, just so we can see where they are and they're copied in. We could then use them as our prompt references for Gemini. I'm going to select all for now. We'll see now that we have a .claude directory here for our new commands and tasks. And then we also have the same for Cursor, working in the form of Cursor rules. And we have our web bundles here. So we have the team and the team full stack. That's what we would have copied and pasted into Gemini a few minutes ago to have our conversation. So just so you know what the file structure is. So if I didn't know the workflow, I could basically just pull in my PO agent or my product owner, and I could prompt here to say, okay, what do we do next? We have all the documents, we're ready to proceed. And it would begin to break us. It would introduce us to the next steps and begin to shard. But we know what to do. So we can also just go to the task section here, and we see that here are all the tasks that you might run on any given project. And here is the shard doc one that we want to run. So we can just copy that over here to Cursor, and then we can also copy in our architecture document. So I'm going to say, so my prompt here says, I want to run this process, which is the shard document process, on this file, which is the architecture MD. And we're using Claude Sonnet here. I'm just going to run this. Now I could do exactly the same thing in Claude. So in Claude, I could have that conversation with the agent, or I can just pull in the shard doc reference here. So I'm saying run this process on this file. And then I'm going to copy in the doc architecture as well and just drop that in here. So to shard documents, it's recommended that you install a Markdown 3 parser. It's a good idea to do this. You can do it without it. It just means that you're going to use a whole lot less credits when you break it down. So we're just going to install that. So if we take a look at this sharding step, it's basically taken our architecture, which is probably one of the most important docs that we have, and broken it down into all these different sharded sections. And we have an index file here, which shows us all the various different parts. So this is important for context with the model, because we don't necessarily want to feed the entire set of documents to the model every time we make a request. We might just need to take a look at the database schema or the core workflows, APIs, etc. And this means we can just feed those relevant files as context when needed. A user story is a way of describing what's happening in the application, and it actually just breaks down a feature or what needs to be built next. So as a user, I want to see the main application layout with the sidebar so that I have the basic structure for interacting with my notes, and then we have this acceptance criteria here as well. So what we want to do with this PRD is break out all these stories so that we can start to work on each individual one with our developer agent. So I've gone and sharded the doc like I did before. So I've sharded the PRD. We just did the architecture one. Now we're doing the PRD. So I said shard.docmd, let's shard the PRD. And then if you open up PRD here, we have all the various different epics and stories broken down. So an epic is basically the parent of a story. It's a larger piece of work. So we basically finished all this planning stage and we're ready for the Scrum Master or the development cycle. And it's the Scrum Master's job in the Agile development workflow to basically go and review the previous stories or review any of the starting stories that we have to break them down so that the dev can begin working on them. Okay, so we have here the Scrum Master drafts the next story from the sharded epic plus architecture. So the Scrum Master has a list of commands that you can run. So I can just type star or help, or I could just open the tasks up here in agents to view what they are, but I'm just going to hit star help here and return. So I'm just going to type in wildcard here or star and draft and see what I get back. So running that draft command, Claude basically goes and finds the relevant docs in the PRD and the architecture and begins to review them and use a template to break them down into a proper story. And what we end up with is a new story directory created here with our first user story 1.1. And you can review this to make sure you're happy before you proceed. And it's even got this full on task and subtask checklist in place. So what we have here is a full-on set of instructions for our developer agent and how to progress with the story. We have our acceptance criteria, our tasks, our subtasks, our technology versions, project structure, testing development scripts, etc. And these are all broken down and pulled from the initial product brief, which moves to the PRD, which moves to the architecture. So this is basically a sub-file or a smaller piece of work that our agent can now progress with. So basically our first story 1.1 has been created. Now we have the option of having that story reviewed by the QA agent. Now this is an optional step. We're just going to skip through this one. And so what we want to do is review it ourselves and then set it to approved if we're happy to go ahead. So up here, you'll see in story 1.1, the status here is draft. So I'm going to say approved. Now it is really important to make sure that you're happy with everything that's listed in here because your first couple of stories are critical to how the rest of the project develops. Now that we have our first story approved, we're going to move to the development agent. So if I switch back over to cursor and I type / here in Claude Code, I can run down here to dev and I'm just going to hit return. So our full stack developer agent, James, says it's ready to go with the first story. So I'm just going to say, proceed with the first story. So you can see here that the agent is actively marking off each one of the tasks and subtasks as it proceeds through. It's referring back to update the status. So you keep the story open to keep an eye on exactly what's happening. Now there was definitely some heavy lifting going on there that probably took about 20 minutes of generation. I'm on the max version of Claude and it already moved from the Opus version down to Claude 4 because I ran into my usage limit. So a ton of heavy lifting done, but it seems to have worked out fine with limited errors. It even went and ran a linting test, a build test. It set up a jest for testing and even end-to-end testing, all in one prompt using this story mode. So there is some upfront time involved in getting this all set up, but I have to say it's left me with a great starting point for our first story. So if we take a look at our story MD file here, you'll see that this status is now ready for review. It's showing me all the different steps that we're taking and they're all checked off here. So that signals the completion of the first story. So essentially our developer agent has run through all the tasks that were listed in that first story piece. It went to running validations and then marked it ready for review and allows me to add notes, etc. So it's now down to me to do the verification to say, yeah, I'm happy with the first phase of development. Now we can actually bring in a senior dev review here. So if I go back to Claude and hit my / command, I can hit the QA to do a review of the code to make sure that everything is on point, and it could refactor it as well. And that's not a bad step, just to see what the outcomes might be. We want to just make sure all our tests are passing, which they did, and the agent went and run those themselves. So now we're in a position where we're pretty much happy. We can mark the story as done. So up here, we can set the status for review to done. And then of course, we can then commit all our changes. And of course, now is a good time to commit. So once we've marked our story as done and we're happy, we go back up through the life cycle and we go back to our Scrum Manager, and the Scrum Manager then would look at the documents again to break down the next set of stories, and we would go through the process again, incrementally moving through all the tasks until we had completed the project. And you can see if I run my Next.js app on localhost 3000, it's all working fine. So nothing to see there yet, but it's basically the scaffolding is in place for our entire application, which is important. So with this, we have Next.js set up, we have our testing, end-to-end testing, we have Playwright in play, we have Prisma, we have our database integration, everything that we need to move forward with to create a great app. I've been following BMAD for a while and I reached out to Brian for a chat. He's a super helpful guy. He said version 5 is coming soon and we'll have a simplified onboarding for new users, which is going to be really welcome because BMAD is super powerful, but it is a little bit complex to learn as you do your first project. So I think there are two ends of the spectrum when it comes to AI software development. On one side, you have vibe coding, and the other side is spec driven development. I think you should experiment with both to understand where each one fits. There are times when you don't need a full on process like the three experts approach or BMAD, and a simple workflow will suffice. But it's also important just to learn Agile and these professional workflows if you want to build production ready apps and work with professional teams, as this is a standard and it's really going to improve the accuracy of your agents. So I'm working on an app called MoltenBase, which brings together a mixture of techniques I cover in the channel and course to help you launch your AI projects. I'll be opening that up to the community and waitlist, so if you're interested, drop an email to join. So I'd love to hear how you guys are approaching spec-driven development. If you want to share it in the comments so I and other people can learn from your experience.